that we've been doing. I want to talk about our transition from 2021 to 2022. Our payout for next year is going to be the highest it's ever been. This year, our payout was 46 million. Our payout next year will be 56 million, which is an increase of 20%. And that sort of got us thinking, but in addition, the context of COVID got us thinking. And in addition, this year is our 25th anniversary year from when we were established as a foundation in its current form. Of course, Kenneth and Hallie Ford had been philanthropically minded for many years before, but we had articles of incorporation and a board of directors and new staff and a place to work out of in 1997. So all of that caused our board to take a step back and say, we need to do a new strategic plan and think about where we want to be, the direction we want to head in 10 years time, 20 years time, and so on. So we spent a lot of last year, the end of 2020 and 2021, undergoing a strategic planning process that actually ended up not with a major change in direction for us. We are still obviously dedicated to rural Oregon and Northern California. We are still dedicated to a lot of the same work we've been doing. It's more that we intend to focus a little bit more of our work. We have grown so much over time that we do a lot of different things. And at this point, our board has asked us to focus particularly on kids, and with the sort of our sort of tagline being that rural kids have the family, educational, and community supports they need to thrive. And this really means we will continue to invest directly in kids and family supports. We will continue to invest directly in education, both specifically at the early years and the preschool years, but also, as you know, we have a scholarship program, so there's post-secondary years. And then the third is we will continue to do our community building work. But some of that community building work might be more targeted around helping communities to build the supports that kids and families need to thrive. So I think from the outside, it won't look a lot different, but from us internally, there's some modest changes that are really focusing on us weaving together our work and grant making around kids and families with our work in communities and community building in a more intentional way. That kind of thing. We intend to keep, our board of directors is very clear that they like to have at least 10% of our funding very much responsive grant making. So we will still have a very open door grant making program that we're calling Good Neighbor. Any grants below 25,000 for programmatic work or up to 50,000 for capital grants can be just very responsive to community priorities, and they don't necessarily have to fit neatly into our children, families, education, and community building framework. But the one thing I want to end with is that what we have spent a lot of time thinking about is how few institutions there are in our state that really lift up the voices of rural people and communities and issues, and about how we as a statewide foundation that is really dedicated to rural people and places need to lean more into our role as a champion for rural causes. And not only for us to pick up more of an active role in being a statewide champion and advocate for rural causes, but also to help lift up the voices of communities, community residents, and community leaders, and do invest in that more intentionally to be loud advocates and voices on behalf of rural places. So that's where the shorthand for that is the rural champion work, and that's something that we hope to do more and more of over time. And as a first step, I'm going to invite Cassie Allen, our Director for Learning and Knowledge Management, to talk about how we're thinking about information, good solid information and data about rural, and a couple of projects there. So over to you, Cassie.
Great, thanks, Anne. And I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I think most of the folks who are participating today are aware of our Oregon by the Numbers report that we now produce annually. We just came out with the 4th edition at the end of last year. And, this project, I think, is an example of what our foundation has learned about really wanting to provide high quality data so that rural communities can make better and better informed decisions, and so that all Oregonians have a source of data that they trust. This investment for us actually began quite a long time ago. And I realize I should have updated this slide. It's 16 years in the making at this point. It will be this year, getting on to, 18, getting on to 20. But the idea for the Rural Communities Explorer and something like Oregon by the Numbers began way back in 2002 and didn't come into fruition until 2008. And it took a lot of collaboration. The Oregon Community Foundation was involved sort of in these middle years here. And right now that work is housed at the Oregon Extension offices. This edition that is coming out next year will be our first where it lands in English and in Spanish. The 2021 edition is also in English and in Spanish, but the Spanish lagged a little behind English. And just a reminder that what we're trying to do with this report is make sure that every one of Oregon's 36 counties has data about themselves, that there are no blank holes out east, and that the data that we provide is valuable to a wide range of folks. We made an effort early on to make sure that that data was visually appealing, that it would be highly accessible. We use a 10th grade reading level so that a wide range of Oregonians can use the report. We organize the measures into these 5 strands. Above and beyond, there's an infographic, which I'll show you in just a moment. And so these are the current measures in the 5 strands, and they haven't changed too much over time, definitely not in the last couple of years. When we change them, it is because there's either a new measure out or because that we think is better than what we have, or that there are some data quality issues that we need to address. And so this is an example of what a county profile looks like. Again, hopefully many of you have seen the report before. And so this is familiar to you. We call that first side the infographic side, which really focuses on who's living in this place, the demographics, some tribal history, and tribal engagement along with employment industries. Some of a new addition, it has been an incorporation of the ALICE data so that we could really begin to see the percentage of households who are experiencing financial hardship. The report starts with those county profiles for the first half. The back half is a measure summary that focuses on rankings by county for each of the measures. And we've chosen to use this type of color pleth mapping, where instead of using the full gradation of all the different shades of green, we just use 3 so that everybody has friends, sort of the top third, middle third, and bottom third. And we let users decide whether being high on the scale is good or bad. And so I think these 2 measures are a good example of that. Most people, broadband access is good. People would prefer to not have super high percentages of mobile housing. Not that mobile housing is bad, but people might look at that in different ways. Broadband access is something we're really working on, because one of the challenges of the data that's available is that it is really just about where is there broadband that people could purchase. It's not who's actually purchasing the broadband. And those are 2 very different things. So lots of folks receive this report. Hopefully many of you do as well. This is the laundry list. And as we're thinking towards 2022, we want to be sure and let you know, hopefully many of you actually participated in this project. Oregon Voices is a first of its kind survey that was conducted in the summer and fall of last year, about 4 years in the making, and focuses very much on the lived experiences of Oregonians with a oversampling for rural. So you'll see that we did a random household phase where 500 households were invited in each of our 36 counties. We also did a phase 2 engagement phase, which was a little bit more about looking at our foundation's reach, where we invited 10,000 of our Ford scholars, community builders, grantees to participate. In total, it's a little more than 40,000 Oregonians who participated. I wanted to just share this graph with all of you of the random household phase, because I think it actually tells a story of any of you who know about Wheeler County, especially these first three. Traditionally, data projects across Oregon have a hard time getting representative data from places like Wheeler Lake and Wallowa County. And those were the folks who really showed up for this particular survey. So we are right in the throes of cleaning our data and getting ready to report it. I know that I'm over time, and so I want to be sure and pass along to our next group here. But what's exciting is that I think I noticed for this invitation today, there were the reports from the Oregon Values and Belief Center, which really focuses on kind of what people believe and think about things. That data, I think, can complement the Oregon Voices data, which is really about what is happening for people as they live their lives? What is their lived experiences, especially in our rural counties? So thanks for this time.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Do we have one more from the Ford Foundation or Ford family?
Nope, that's it.
Okie doke. Well,
Thank you.
it's plenty. Thank you so much. That's really fabulous information. And I thought, geez, we should really get this on our Jeff website. Okay. So let's move now. And I'm going to ask, for time reasons, if you have questions, can we hold them until the end? If you make a notation of your question, and then we'll go through the gallery and get to them. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. We have a very full agenda today. Deanne Everson. Thank you. You're up next.
I'll go really fast. Speaking on behalf of the OCF board, first, I just want to say Oregon by the Numbers is so great. And we have shared it with all of our volunteers because it helps us to evaluate choices that we make at the United Way. So thank you for doing it. And having done the Arizona Statistical Review for 17 years, I'm thrilled to see someone does it in Oregon. OCF had a record year, both in terms of contributions to the foundation. They're now over $3 billion compared to the early days that Bill was talking about. And they made more than $330 million in grants, including two huge state programs, Project Turnkey for $75 million and Summer Learning for an additional $40 million. Obviously, it's transition year with Max Williams announcing his departure. The search is underway, and the board is using Spencer Stewart as their search consultant. Strategic visioning is going around because OCF will be doing it as well this year, and hoping to launch a new plan with the 50th anniversary celebration in 2023. And still doing all that regular work that we all think we're doing. They have a very cool report on Black student success for those of you immersed in the BIPOC population and student success. It's on the website. I'd encourage y'all to check it out. That's it for me. Amy Drake.
Thank you, Deanne.
Yeah, thank you, Deanne, for sharing about OCF's big picture. So I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about OCF's community grants program, in part because many of you are familiar with it, since it's been OCF's primary responsive grant making program for over 20 years. But I wanted to take a couple minutes to make sure you're all updated on what's new and what's changing. A little bit in line with these strategic conversations we've been talking about, but especially too if nonprofits come to you asking about other funding opportunities for 2022. So the community grants program has been evolving significantly over the past 2 years as the crises have unfolded in Oregon. And with these crises, as you know, have compounded existing inequities and impacts on marginalized communities across the state. As we look ahead to 2022, OCF recognizes that these ongoing issues facing Oregon, and the unique role that nonprofits and organizations continue to play in responding to emerging and ongoing needs. Our goal with the 2022 Community Grants Program is to remain flexible and evolve our grant making approaches with new learnings as we continue to work towards recovery and rebuilding in Oregon. So all that being said, the biggest change for the 2022 Community Grants Program is that we're experimenting with one annual grant cycle rather than the usual two. And this is pertinent because applications open soon on February 14th, so just a couple weeks away, with an application deadline of March 30th at 5 p.m. Most of those decisions will be announced in early August, with some small grant decisions announced in June. We're offering funding for 4 types of requests: capacity program, operating support for culturally specific and small rural organizations, and capital support for projects with budgets under $500,000. OCF has about $6 million to award statewide. And I wanted to make sure to highlight this because it's one piece of the way that the funding landscape is changing in Oregon statewide, and it will have an impact on our Southern Oregon community as well, both in terms of when funding is available and what that means during the rest of the year. Much more information about the Community Grants Program is on OCF's website, which I'll link to in the chat. And we're also, if you're interested in learning much more, we're hosting a 1-hour online applicant webinar on February 11th to share a more in-depth look at the program. And there's a link to register for that webinar on the page. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kristen to share more about the Community Rebuilding Fund.
Thank you, Amy. And thanks everyone for having me here today. So as Amy said, I wanted to share about the Community Rebuilding Fund, which was the initiative with Oregon Community Foundation, Ford Family Foundation, and My Memorial Trust in response to Oregon's 2020 wildfires. So just to recap a bit about the fund, we set a goal of raising $10 million to distribute in response. We have exceeded that goal and continue to raise money. To date, we distributed the funds in 2 phases. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we've done to date and then also our plans for the coming months. So the first phase was a round of capacity building funding. We had a little over $2 million. It was pretty quickly, but strategically deployed to address some pretty severe needs for capacity among nonprofits who had been dealing with COVID and had a need for staffing, for infrastructure, for their own organization. So that need came about through some community surveying we did early on and just conversations that we had with different communities that were impacted. So the second phase of the 2 phases was we had pulled together an advisory team who helped to inform the criteria and focus area for the awarded funds. And this more responsive phase 2 of the fund was distributed on a rolling basis as early as August and as late as just recently in early November. So this one, close to $6 million was awarded. The rolling basis ended up being a really great idea because it allowed us, as Mr. Thorndike mentioned earlier, gave us a chance to see, to really coordinate with government and coordinate and make sure that as some state and federal funds and ARPA funds came through and shook out kind of where those landed, to make sure that our funding wasn't redundant to some of those, or that could complement it in unique ways to some of the state and federal funding too. So through both of those 2 phases, the Community Rebuilding Fund has awarded $8 million, a little over $8.5 million to 87 organizations across the 2020 wildfire impacted communities. So we spent the last month doing a kind of a gap analysis and a review of how that money was awarded. So we have a real clear understanding of the geographic spread, spread by focus area, by cultural group. So I have just a few numbers to share with you of that funding so far. So the average award size was $114,000. 73% of grantee requests were funded. This is something that was really important to us, especially for the responsive funding phase, where really did our best to turn away the least number of organizations. We did a lot of outreach on exactly what we were looking for, a lot of local outreach. We helped organizations who were less familiar with online portals. We helped them write their applications, helped get them submitted, really did a lot. In that same vein, a little over a fifth of the organizations funded were organizations with operating budgets under $500,000. This was also important to us to make sure that funding was accessible to organizations of all sizes. We heard a lot in the early months, that just sort of the kind of same old large organizations sort of get the money every time, and how can we really make it a proactive focus that this funding is accessible. And I'm not equating size of organization with, you know, capacity necessarily or efficiency, but just making it clear that there was a real proactive effort to make sure smaller organizations could access this support. Those without development staff, those without grant writers, that they could also seek this funding. So also 80% of our awardees had a very proactive for us, by us approach and representation. So if the funding was to go directly to cash awards to survivors, for example, we made sure there was survivors who were making the decisions on where this funding was going. We had another group that was funding for folks with disabilities. They were preparing go bags and installing handrails for easier ways to leave, to exit their trailer if needed. And so we had made sure that there were people with disabilities who were living or had lived in trailers who were directing this program and these programs. So that was something that was also really important to the advisory team and to all the funding groups involved as well. So now for the second phase, also of that funding, so about 60% was direct service, 22% was capital awards, and about 20% was capacity building. And then, so moving forward, so we, to kind of complement this data, we're now hosting some small group discussions. We're having one-on-one interviews. We're getting the advisory team back together. We also are following a cohort of about a dozen organizations representative of grantees, so we can learn along the way. We've been following them since their award about barriers they're encountering, or what successes they've had in getting the money spent and getting their projects moving. So all of this is going to inform the next few months. So we, you know, we have some extra money left remaining to get out to communities. So now it's really taking the time to listen, learn, and find out how best to direct that. So some needs that have already emerged are, of course, continued housing needs, environmental recovery and resiliency. There's some mental health needs that weren't apparent in the early times of the disasters, but have now emerged. And also really all of the four you know, core funding partners for this are really interested in the systemic changes that have occurred to date with this funding, and sort of how we can continue to support that in communities. So this additional funding will likely be granted out in second quarter. So right now we're just trying to make sure we're learning from communities about the best way to do that. We also have some additional data too on the priority areas and how the funding was distributed. So we have a written report we'll get out to everyone, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go read those unless you'd like me to. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
You bet.
I have a couple questions I'm saving
You got it.
for you.
Okay,
So
you got it.
thank
I'll stick
you
around.
Very much. And
Yep.
before we go to Jim White, I did want to give Marie Simons from Wild Rivers an opportunity to introduce herself.
Well, thanks so much. My name is Marie Simons, and I'm the Executive Director at Wild Rivers Coast Alliance. We are the grant-making department of Bandon Dunes Golf Resort. So thanks. Glad to be here today.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Marie. Okay, thank you. And so Jim White.
Hey, thanks. I just want to make sure, Ann, that I understand the time. So everybody is available until 2:30, is that right? And then some are going to drift off.
Some will
So
have to exit out,
we
right?
need to fit questions within that time. Okay, so I'm going to go.
Well, and some people have the opportunity to have said they could stay. So
Right.
yeah.
But I'd like to give everybody a chance to ask others questions, because
That's
we have
right.
all the questions.
Okay.
So I'll try and go quickly and not say too much that you don't already know. So Jennifer asked me to talk a little bit today about 2 years into the pandemic, what we've learned so far, what nonprofits are experiencing. I think you, as responsive funders and as funders who are in regular conversations with your grantees and the groups that you're involved with, you certainly understand that they have been under enormous stress, that there has been a level of disruption in the sector, first from the pandemic, then we have issues around racial awareness and a new understanding of what that means in society. And then we have the additional issues of workforce restrictions and the way that the pandemic has lingered for so long. And then, of course, we have the successive wildfires and continued disasters. So we've got a situation now with the nonprofit sector where folks are absolutely, they've either reached sort of the end of their rope and maybe making employment decisions based on that. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. Or they've been able to adapt. And I'd like to take the positive out of this is that I've been amazed at the adaptability of a lot of the leaders in the nonprofit sector and the way that they're rethinking even the business models of these nonprofits. We've been engaged with a number of organizations in various cohorts and in some of the trainings that we do around how they are rethinking the way that their organization meets their bottom line to continue to serve the mission in many cases in either a virtual environment, some hybrid environment, and the most extreme are those organizations who absolutely have to do all of their, or the majority of their programming person to person in place. And those are some of the most impacted organizations. And so when we think about and we're trying to help understand the dynamic of what's been going on for what's going to be 2 years here shortly, right? I distinctly remember being in the Ford Family Foundation offices on March 6th. That was the last in-person meeting of the Jeff group. And it's almost 2 years coming up here shortly in another month, if we can believe it. So those business models are changing in a significant way, and they have been significantly impacted by the just flood, but sort of place and topic-based flood of money coming from the government. And what I mean by that is that you're I'm sure aware that the ability for the government at varying levels to get money out the door meets its normal bureaucracies and its catch points within government. The way in which government then understands their own regulations and rules and how they then apply them to these nonprofits who they on grant or on contract these services to is important to really think about and to understand. And we're seeing a level of expectation, both of compliance, but also of continued ability for these organizations to function while government itself is interestingly competing with these organizations. We've had organizations contact us where they have, it's a requirement of the ARPA money to get a letter of from local government in support of a nonprofit's application. And some governments are saying, well, we're not giving you that letter because we're competing with you for that exact same tranche of money. And this is after government has already gotten their first piece, right? So the state already got a ton of money out of ARPA. So we're very concerned basically about what's happening with that. And I'm hopeful that you all as influencers, let's say, within your circles can help some of our policymaking colleagues and or executive from a regulatory standpoint colleagues understand the dynamic that's being created. We should all remind ourselves that we're the trust that society has right now in government, unfortunately in business, in other institutions of our communities is rather low, right? And that's been proven through multiple sources and multiple studies. but the trust that they still have in our sector, in the nonprofit sector, and in philanthropy and in civil society actors, remains relatively high. And so there's both a great opportunity there, and I think a responsibility there that we need to learn from, to help influence within legal constructs. I understand what private foundations can and can't do, but the amount of resources that government has and the ability that they have to help these organizations is quite considerable, and therefore we should try to help them understand how community works and how they can best apply those funds. So I also want to mention here that many nonprofits have noticed and are living the reality of the creep of politics, feeling at the front end of politics in their mission and their businesses, feeling like, mask, no mask, vaccine, no vaccine, restriction, no restriction. They're on the front line of a lot of that action, and it's certainly exhausting, I think, for all of us, but it's exhausting for people who day in and day out are trying to give services to their communities, and there's both a sense of them not having a clear North Star that they can point to on how they manage. I was recently on a call with a nonprofit leader who is a CEO of a $20 million a year plus health and human service organization. And she was at the front desk because they were so far deep in their staffing shortages. And that's the second big piece I wanted to name here is, and I'll start to transition a little bit into the workforce issues that we've been studying and what we've been seeing. But the workforce issues and the mental health issues are apparent and acute in many cases. I wanted to remind everybody that Jennifer sent out that OVBC study about what Oregons think about mental health services. And I found it fascinating in there that Oregonian satisfaction with mental health resources in their area is 23%. And the cost of prescription medications for mental health is only 17%. So that's really telling as to the ability that we have to help ourselves and to help the communities which have been impacted by multiple disasters, if you will, right? You've got pandemics, you've got wildfires, you have some people who've already been historically marginalized, and that's then further exacerbated during these kinds of events. So mental health, as we see it now, both within the sector and then for the people that we're serving, is an acute issue. And in speaking with some mental health professionals, it's a diagnosable issue. When we talk about words like burnout, there's actual frames around what that actually means and how we're seeing that institute itself through what the media is sort of shorthanding as the great retirement / great resignation. And so just recently, so in the end of last year, we partnered with the other state associations and our national colleagues for the National Council of Nonprofits to conduct a survey on workforce shortages and what's driving those shortages in communities. I'm lucky, or we're fortunate to say that through our participation, NAO was the promoter of this for Oregon. Oregon had the second highest response rate in the country to this study. So we have good data for Oregon. And so we were able to ask the National Council of Nonprofits to take just our data, and we can look at our data. And so what we're seeing in that, I wanted to share a few top line issues with you, is that for job vacancies, as people are experiencing unemployment right now or not wanting to be employed, of the over 100 organizations that responded to this survey, 43% reported more than 20% vacancies. So more than 20%. And of that 43, 9% said that they had vacancies of greater than 30%. So nearly half, just, 43%, 20% vacancies for their organizations. I will say that the data was skewed somewhat toward health, human services, and direct service organizations. There weren't as many, let's say, arts and cultural organizations, for instance, that responded, which to me is also concerning because it could be that they're not even working right now, and therefore there was nobody there to respond, right? So there's some sort of deeper diving into this data that we've been doing to try and understand what exactly it means. The other part of this I wanted to raise is the why. What are the factors that are affecting our ability as nonprofits to recruit and retain staff? And by overwhelming majority, 76% of respondents said it's salary competition is the major factor preventing them from filling jobs. That has all kinds of issues associated with it. I think many of you probably are aware, there was an article I think it was just last week, that Oregon now has more positions open than we have people unemployed, statistically, is what the Oregon Labor Department's reporting. The second largest finding we have in this study is that, and when I say these percentages are going to go, well, 76 and 29, that's more than 100%, but you can have both. You can choose more than one of these, so the percentages aren't going to equal exactly 100%. But nearly 30% of the respondents stated that the inability to find reliable childcare was affecting recruitment and retention. And we know that that has been particularly difficult for a community. I mean, the nonprofit sector is 70% female, right? So you have a lot of people in our sector who are bouncing what are often traditional childcare responsibilities with their day job, and their day job is losing out, partly because they're not getting paid enough to even pay the caretaker to watch their kids. So the closures that we're seeing and the restrictions and the going, back and forth from kids are in school, kids are back at home, kids are in school, is really playing havoc on these nonprofits and the ability for them to retain staff. The other issue I want to just quickly identify here is that vaccine policies, because I think this is an important one to talk about, is that 27% of the respondents for Oregon, again, said that vaccination policies were the major issue affecting their ability to recruit and retain staff. And that's, I think, pretty interesting and pretty telling if we're losing nearly a third of our people around whether you're applying a vaccine policy to your organization. So that has been a particularly interesting finding of this workforce study. So we are going to be doing some deep dive into this and producing a summary of what the National Council has already done with this data, and we're hoping to release that here shortly. And we'll be sure to send it to the Jeff group, so we'll send it to Jennifer, and she can send it to everybody who's on this call. Checking my time here, I also wanted to make sure that we mention the sort of the leadership ecosystem, right? So we're very concerned with both people who are choosing not to work, right, on the one hand, but we're also seeing a significant move of people out of the sector into retirement. And the succession of leadership is, in some cases, questionable whether or not this organization is going to be able to survive the succession to a new leader, or if that leader can even be identified if so many people are choosing not to work in this sector for any of those reasons that I named, pay or childcare or or the vaccination status and requirements. So we're seeing a large possibility for a move of many of the leadership of organizations, including Main Street organizations, out of the sector into retirement formally, and less clarity as to where these positions are going to land in the long run. So that's of concern, and we're certainly, we know that a number of you are concerned about that as well, and have programs to try to make sure that you can help to stabilize those folks who are in those communities who are doing so much in their day job and in their after hours job of possibly being on the board of a nonprofit. Some of the wellness issues, I did want to mention this, some of the wellness, the mental health issues and wellness issues, and they're playing out in boardrooms, and they're playing out in the relationship between boards and staff. We're seeing that again and again, that we've got quite a number of help desk calls that we field weekly, and a big uptick in questions about how to work with my board, or how a board president can better work with the rest of the board or with the staff, feeling like there are significant challenges of either a political nature, people are just burned out and not showing up, so you haven't had a quorum in 3 board meetings, right? There's real difficulties now in how do we even run these organizations, because ultimately the board is responsible for, the running of the organization, even if they delegate it to staff, delegate portions of that to staff. So we've been advising a lot of nonprofits, this might be the year that they really have to look at their bylaws and simplify the way that they work and what they're trying to do in terms of how they can help these organizations get through this period. So trying to think about simplifying themselves so that they themselves don't have to be accountable to rules that they can't actually keep in practice, right? So much of what's in ORS 65 has to do with do what's in your bylaws, do what's in your bylaws, but if your bylaws haven't been updated in 10 years, you are faced with holding certain responsibilities, and your bylaws are the law if you created it that way. If the ORS 65 says do what's in your bylaws for that particular issue and you're not doing it, you are literally breaking the law. You're not just breaking your bylaws. So we've seen that as a pretty important issue and a concerning issue. So the other thing I wanted to just mention here is, just look at my notes here and make sure I'm on track. So Jennifer asked me to talk.
How'd you do?
Sorry?
I'm gonna have more appointments.
Oh, really?
Oops. Hi.
Not really.
Jen, can you mute us?
I don't know if I can you mute them? Anyway, well, I wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about the
Oh,
capacity
no.
to help people with that succession. So Kathy asked here about NAO is offering interim executive director programs at this time. We're not. We don't do direct interim director programs, but I just had a conversation last week with another a company that is setting up more interims. We've been raising this as an issue, and we've also been talking to a number of people who are moving out of the sector, encouraging them, can you serve as an interim, and can we connect you in with consulting firms that we know are doing that work, or folks that we know are just standing as, as they call them, single shingles, just to be available to be connected in and be a possible resource for these organizations. So NAO is doing a lot around wellness and around compliance. We recognize that right now, those in some cases are going hand in hand, that taking the stress off of some of these directors or their staff around what they can and have to comply with, either within their grants that you're asking them to comply with, or within government money, which has all kinds of strange hooks and barbs to it, is something that we put a lot of energy into this year, and we're doing a lot to try to push out some workbooks. In fact, we have our annual meeting tomorrow morning, and we're going to be announcing some workbooks that we're going to be making available, so people can use those to think through and find the best ways that they can support their organization. Just this morning, we did a special training for all of the long-term recovery group boards across Oregon. And I'm happy to say that the Jackson County Community LTRG was very well represented. Deanne was on that call. There she is. Yep. Deanne was on that call as one of the board members. But we had a good showing from across all the different fire impacted areas across Oregon. And, those organizations in particular are seeing themselves transition into something new right now, as they're now entering into their sort of second year of doing the recovery services, and will be around for quite a while longer. Some of them are now being staffed. So that's a transition for these organizations, right? And they're going to have to move differently and look differently. So the other thing I just want to mention real quickly is we recognize that fundraising is still a huge issue. What's been interesting over the last 2 years is that depending on the organization, it's either feast or famine, right? It's either the organization got a ton of money through CARES Act or other resources, and they've grown in terms of revenue size, even if they haven't been able to grow in terms of staffing and delivery capability, right? So there's that challenge that's happening. We're also, though, seeing a number of organizations that are just sort of sitting on the fringes and outside of the ability to connect and make their fundraising goals. So interestingly, we do see, I mean, there's a point at which the government money to support a small community theater to stay shuttered dries up, but the restrictions are still in place, and that small community theater can't actually do their programming, and they haven't been able to find the right, different way of doing things. And so we're seeing particularly some smaller organizations that are in a difficult time in terms of their fundraising.
Jim, we have to wrap up.
I know. Okay.
Okay.
Last thing I do want to say, can I say this, is that
Yes.
ONLC is April 12th. We're very happy to be working with an advisory committee of the Oregon Nonprofit Leaders Conference this year. NAO is working together with a group, some of them are on here, and we are excited to have that happening. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those about what's happening with ONLC, but it will be a virtual conference on April 12th.
Wow, thank you so much, Jim. That's a tremendous amount of information, not just from you, but for all of our speakers. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, would you go into the reaction button and raise your hand? And Jennifer's going to keep track of who's on first, who shows up second, and we'll try to go through the list as fairly as we can. So if there's something you need to have clarified, you'd like some more information, you want to make a comment, just raise your hand and we will find you. It will show up on your photo, or at least your phone. So yeah. Any questions? We sure heard a lot of information. Okay.
Well, maybe just one question, Jim, going back to my original question about the interim executive director role, which was, I don't know how well it was utilized when it was under NAO. I know we helped bring someone down here for one of the programs in a few years ago. And so just seems like that's an important thing. So when do you think this other organization that you're speaking of is going to be making a decision about that? And how would we all find out about it so that we can propose that in our communities that might be needing to have some of that type of assistance?
Sure. So we actively, like I said, we just had a conversation with them last week. This is a joint company that works together with CFO Selections. So CFO Selections is the interim CFO company that we work with, that does, interim CFOs and searches for CFOs. So this other standalone company is just trying to get their feet on the ground here in Oregon. And so we were interested to hear what they're thinking and how they're doing it, and to suggest people who may be moving out of the community of direct, being an executive director, but want to then be an interim. So trying to connect them with the people who could start to stable, to be within their folks that they're relying on. I know that there are a number of other groups and there are individuals who do this. It's been frankly really hit or miss. As to who is doing it in any particular community and what their specialization in. Somebody who may have skills in, running arts and culture organizations may not be the person to run a large human service or a small, human service organization. So we will certainly be talking about succession through the spring, because we see this as a huge issue. And so Kathy, we'll definitely put out there, these are the groups that we know are doing this work in that.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
And if there are no other questions, can I say one more thing?
I don't have a question. I have a comment on what you were saying, though, Jim.
Sure.
The things you're describing in terms of the workforce shortage in the philanthropic industry, to me, are consistent with everything we're seeing across the board in all industry sectors. And the issues you've raised are some of the issues around childcare, pay, quality of life, and/or priorities. So there's tons and tons of both data and/or kind of nascent research that's coming out about what the times we're in. The one thing I might recommend to folks, and I can send this out as a link afterwards, is there was actually quite a really good presentation that Kristen Kaler, who is an Oregon Employment Department economist, labor economist, did at the State Workforce Board meeting back earlier last year, where he talked about not only is this being driven by COVID and all the other things you described, all the factors you described, and there's also a presentation I did at our last Workforce Board meeting that described some of these factors that are driving the labor market shortage across all these industries. But a big one, in addition to COVID, is the long-term demographics, and not just baby boomers retiring, but the very low fertility rate of next generation workers. So to me, what I'm telling all of our industry sector leaders in our region and across the state is that buckle down, get ready, because this is going to be with us for quite some time. This is not going to go away anytime soon. And I think every industry is going to have to get very, very creative and very innovative about how it attracts not only its top level leaders, executive directors and program officers, et cetera, but the entirety of their pipeline. So that's the kinds of things we're doing with every industry and from every across all boards, from high level, knowledge workers to, frontline entry level, production workers. This is going to be the issue of our times. So just wanted to double down on some of what you're saying, and that if folks are interested in diving into that more with this group or the other associations with philanthropy, I think we can offer some limited resources for you, or some resources for you to help you problem solve and figure out how you feel your talent pipeline needs.
Great. Jim, as I listened to you, it occurred to me that this could be the prime opportunity now to reconfigure our immigration
Absolutely.
forms.
Absolutely.
Really, to say not every employee needs to be natural born citizen, to meet our needs. So
it actually came up in the state. I'll send you the link to that Workforce Board meeting. It was last year sometime. I'll give you the time section it was in. That actually came up a bit in that conversation. It's certainly something that we in our region, in the Rogue Valley, are looking to. How do we position ourselves with all of our different immigrant communities, particularly in our region, it's mostly the Latino AX community, but recognizing that things are so broken at the federal level in terms of public policy that it may not happen anytime in our lifetime that we have real meaningful immigration reform. But at the same time, you have folks like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other industry groups all advocating for immigration reform. So I think there is a moment and a momentum where we can kind of pull together lots of different, resources or advocacy points to kind of try and offset the logjam and the ideological kind of divide that's gotten worse in DC. The DC ideology is really totally counter to what's really needed in our economic and our labor market right now. It's profound actually how disconnected it is. But you're right, Anne, it's an absolute opportune time to try and make that case with a lot of different partners.
Mhm. Anne, did you have a comment? Anne Kubish?
Yeah, I mean, it was, thanks, Jim, for that follow-up. I think Jim Fong, thanks, Jim White, for the statistics. Thanks, Jim Fong, for the follow-up. We are seeing this workforce challenge everywhere. And I just think having a number like you had of 43% of them have 20% vacancies is just, I'm so happy to have that statistic because it gives me a hard number to attach to something that we've been hearing about anecdotally. So I just think it's so helpful to have that. And Jim Fong, I think we couldn't agree with you more about, especially about the role of new arrivals, immigrants, et cetera. One of the lines that we always say out loud is sort of the championing the Latinx revitalization of rural Oregon, because that's what we need to look forward to. There's a second thing that I wanted to just share that is sort of implicit in what Kristen was talking about and what Jim was talking about, which is how much federal money there is that is rolling around and waiting to be applied for, and how little capacity our rural organizations have to apply for these dollars. And this is something that we at the Ford Family Foundation have been working on, and Jim White has been helping, and a lot of other people who are on this screen have been helping. What can we do to increase the capacity of rural organizations that we know have low capacity, that don't have the ability to really apply for federal grants? And it's not just grant writing. There's a lot of other things that are sort of the obstacles. What can we do in a more systematic way as philanthropy to invest in nonprofits' capacity to be able to know what federal funding opportunities are out there now, especially with the infrastructure dollars coming down, and if there's Build Back Better, there's going to be even more. How to understand how to help organizations be ready to apply for the funds when the notices come out, because the turnaround time is so quick, how they can find the capacity to help write the grants. And then all of the other things that you all probably know better than I do, but I've learned a lot about recently about you need feasibility studies, you need matching dollars, you need the ability to manage a federal grant, and so on. So it's not just about grant writing, it's about sort of helping to build the capacity of our nonprofit organizations, especially in rural areas that are so small, that to help them be able to get ready to apply for these things. And I thought it was interesting, Jim White, that you said, it's either feast or famine. Those who are sort of positioned to receive these dollars are sort of overwhelmed, and then the rest are sort of starving. So both the workforce and the applying for federal funds, just sort of in light, as Bill Thorndike said when we started out, that's where the big money is, and that's what we got to do, is got very much on our minds. And so any ideas that others have, we'd love to hear about.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and I speak this as with my Kelly nonprofit consulting hat on, because that's a lot of what we do, is help organizations build capacity. And a couple of things that have worked for the clients we serve and the communities we serve is, one is really incentivizing cooperation and collaboration ahead of time. So working within a small community, identifying who in that community is best positioned to apply for federal funds. Can they get some MOUs ahead of time with other smaller nonprofits who provide great services but may not have the capacity, desire, nor should they be managing federal funds? And so having those sort of pre-developed arrangements ahead of time, so that when the announcements come out, you have groups who are ready to go. That's something that we have helped pull together, as different partnerships in Harney County in Eastern Oregon, through 5 counties in Eastern Oregon, so that they have now been able 3, 4, 5, 6 times over to access state funds and federal funds as a group, 5 different organizations doing 5 different things in 5 different counties, but they came together. They knew who was going to apply, what the reporting looked like, who was going to be responsible for what, and all of that pre-work made them that the kind of fund readiness work. It made that possible. It would not have been possible had that not been ready. Another big concern we see, and we work with about 45 nonprofits across the state, is, and even for organizations that have the capacity to apply, is this is something that I personally would love to get going, is some sort of short-term loan. Something is that all federal funds, if most, are on a reimbursement basis, a lot of state funds as well. And so the ability to weather the cost of doing the business, reporting on the program metrics, is not something that most nonprofits can front for 30 days is what's promised. It ends up being about 60 days once the reporting and the checks come through. So having some short-term fund that nonprofits can dip into to say, we're just need to alone basically until this federal funding, the state funding kicks in. And that's not just federal, that's state funding too. There's quite a number of state funds that are on a reimbursement basis. And the ones that we've worked with, we work with Business Oregon a lot. We work with their Real Opportunities Initiative program. We have helped to do what we can to get a large 30% or 40% distributed up front. But that is one organization. There's plenty more that distribute state and federal funds too. So I have a lot more ideas, but I don't want to hog the space. But this is really what we're working on. Actually, I was working with Mauricio on your team, and to really talk about this issue and some solutions. It's on my mind a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Next, Deanne, and then Michelle. Deanne Everson. And then Michelle. Did we lose Deanne? I think we lost Deanne. Did we, Jen?
Am I back? Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Yep, you're
I'm
back.
here.
You're back.
So there's a desperate need around reporting, and there's the opportunity to do advocacy at the state and federal levels to change those sorts of ridiculous requirements. But we just paid over $7,500 for the single audit and $16,000 for our regular audit. And we were able to afford that, but small rural organizations cannot afford that. And it's really hard to go to donors and say, hey, will you fund my audit? Because that is a thrilling donation to give.
True. Thank you. Thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, I'll just share that we are working on, actually, I mean, this is built, what's beautiful is this built off an investment Ford Family Foundation made like 10 plus years ago with some local leaders, Tim Hoon, Lynn Craig, who are part of the federal grant writing architects program. So they came to us with a proposal that we're actually doing another pilot project of that and looking and investing in Southern Oregon and Northern California for an 8-month cohort. And so the grant architects concept is something that's already been built. It's been successful, but it's about that, I think, exactly to the points you all were talking about. And it's looking at the span from understanding all the federal funding to like how to pull people together and convene to collaborate. It's, linking up then what's the right kind of project planning and program design all the way through to like evaluating, monitoring, and managing the programs. And then that being able to report and kind of that full circle of it. So we're really excited to be launching that pilot and sharing what works and doesn't with it. We're looking at doing an online cohort. So that is something that's a little bit different. And they'll be developing that as a fully Google documented PowerPoint. So we're excited about actually having all of that content in a more shareable format. And then the other thing I'll say is something that we've been partnering with one of our local CDFIs. And really it's part of what we're looking at as I'll share the link in here from the Center for Community Investment, but the capital absorption model for rural communities. Again, this is something where we have a lot of issues, exactly to all your points about rural communities do not have the infrastructure set up to be competitive with the current funding coming out. So along that model is, defining shared priority, building the moving pipeline of projects, getting those lined up, being able to look at things as like one project, but then also how does it link up across the board? And that's what we're trying to partner with our CDFI on, is how do we build in their understanding and ability to center racial equity issues in their lending practices, as well as looking at that full system of investments. So then when we're looking at a region, we're more attractive, right, for some of these big investments through that CDFI side, using our social funding and investments, and then also the federal dollars coming out. So really trying to look at the braided approach to funding.
And you're muted. I try to be so polite and then it doesn't work. But can you get the information out to Jennifer so she can share that with the community here? That's really exciting. Super exciting. Thank you, Michelle, so much. Okay, any other hands? Jim.
Well, I have something that I'm hoping that this will be good news, is that there, as Ann Kubish mentioned, we're working on both the downstream side with her and others, and really excited to hear what Michelle was just talking about, what Kristen I know is well engaged with around that, how to get it out in the community. We've been working a lot upstream to try to change the laws that require this level of ridiculousness, to what Deanne was just mentioning. And so there is now a live legislative concept at the federal level that has not yet been put into an HR, but that would dig into some of these contracting grant requirements, enforce OMB circular from 2014 that apparently nobody pays any attention to. For instance, the de minimis 10% admin, the fact that they're supposed to not have these on reimbursement status. I mean, there's lots of rules the government is breaking all the time. And perhaps most importantly, it's going to create an office within the president's office. So basically a White House office for nonprofit partnerships, which is the first time in the history of America we've had anything like that. Simultaneously, and we're now just going to invest ourselves, NAO, in a public policy director this year. In fact, if you know anybody, please send them my way. Jobs live. But we are interested to try to mirror that here in Oregon. I know it looks like Jim Fong may have jumped off, but no, there he is. With the workforce issues, I mean, we partner all the time with Nick and Dallas and his team, and looking at the numbers, before COVID, 200,000 Oregonians were employed by nonprofits. That put us at about 12.3% of the private workforce. That's bigger than manufacturing in Oregon, and yet there's no single office at the governor's level that actually deals with nonprofit stuff. And so what keeps happening is, as all that federal money came down, right, OHA determines it this way. Housing and Community Services determines that their compliance requirements are a different way. Another group, DHS does it yet again a third way. And so there's no distributed understanding of how they're going to move the money, how they should behave in representation back to the federal government on what they're going to do in terms of reporting requirements for the money. So we've been working back channel with a lot of the state agencies themselves. There were times that we had to convince CFOs of line departments, no, you don't have to collect receipts for anything that amounts to more than $5,000 of expenses. Total, not one expense of over 5,000. If the nonprofit spent more than 5,000 of their money, they wanted to collect receipts for everything. And it was like, well, good luck with that. So we're very concerned at the way that the state and the feds have been interpreting these rules incorrectly for years, but the rules still need to be changed, even if they do interpret them correctly. So we're hopeful that that work will get into place in the not too distant future. This will take years, though. I don't want anybody to have any misunderstandings here. It's not like by next year we're going to suddenly see a releasing of some of these federal requirements, even if this office gets created. So
Jim, I just want to follow up with you, and some of this I think we can do offline with you and whoever else makes sense. That data point you just shared is the first I've ever heard that. I think it was very unique to hear that 12% number. I think I'd be really interested. One is also kind of figuring out how you got to it or how you found it, because I think what little I've seen, or what lots of what I've seen in terms of the employment department databases on this, I don't know that I'd be really curious to kind of both, one, validate that number, but two, also take up this kind of mantle with you all, because you're right. I mean, this whole topic is, I very much am concerned about the well-being of our, and the vitality of, and the entirety of our economic system around all these fronts, because it's all interdependent, whether it's manufacturing, which is a critical driver for economic vitality in our whole state. It's one of the key traded sector companies that drive, economic well-being and higher wages, et cetera. But also, we have 6 sectors we work with in our region. It includes healthcare, it includes behavioral health, it includes we're just adding childcare and child and family services, because if you, like you said, if you don't have childcare, you don't have workers. If you don't have people, if you don't have bus drivers, you can't have kids going to school. If you don't have school teachers or substitute teachers, it's all interdependent, as well as our major sectors that drive regional economic prosperity, including construction, and we have huge needs for firefighters, et cetera. So I think it'd be really interesting to kind of follow up with you on the data you have, because I've not seen it before. And to your point specifically, how do we engage state, and particularly state level leaders in our case, but also the national ones, about how might we kind of incorporate these priorities along with these other key industry sectors? Because we're a workforce board. We are not a direct service provider. We're like many of you. We are both kind of aggregators of funding, or kind of, grant writers, but also grant givers. And we're spending money. And this latest piece that the governor's just proposed on the Future Ready Oregon, which is a $200 million ask at the legislative level for workforce development, focuses just on construction, manufacturing, and I can't remember if there might be healthcare. We have a $50 million ask as a state association of workforce boards that was prepared well in advance of the governor's proposal. So we're in active conversations with the governor's office about how do we kind of align those two, if we can, to create a single ask of the legislature. But within all of that, I think we have to think about the nonprofit sector, to your point, as how do we help that sector also get the workers they need, just like the same way we're trying to do with the early learning childcare group, just like we're trying to do with the behavioral health group, just like we're trying to do with the healthcare. I mean, we need more caregivers and CNAs, in our region than anything else, and the hospitals literally say to us, if we need to do this in such a balanced way, because we cannot rob all the CNAs from the care facilities, because then we won't have any beds for people to go to when they're done with the hospital stay. So we have to manage this as a system. So I'd be happy to follow up with you offline and any other partners around this table to kind of see how do we have that conversation, and to kind of and I totally agree with you. This is a multi-year effort. We got to play the short as well as particularly the long game on this.
I'm really hearing a very, very powerful intention for this year, for 2022, around the people that are involved with, fund, and actually work in the nonprofit sector. So thank you. And so any other questions or comments? Going once, twice. Thank you so much for coming today. It's wonderful to see everyone's face. And you are right, Ann Kubish. If we're lucky, we will see you in person at your place. So we're watching the numbers. We're watching those metrics. And when we get the high sign, we're all carpooling. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Great way to start the year. It's wonderful to see you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne.
You're welcome.